On a late August morning, just north of Lake Huron in Canada, a miracle of nature is about to unfold. This tiny caterpillar is destined to become a monarch butterfly. In one of the most amazing transformations in the animal world, the caterpillar will outgrow and shed its skin 4 times. The 5th time, the caterpillar disappears. It's transformed into a chrysalis, a delicate case within which a completely new being takes form. After about 10 days in the chrysalis, the new creature is complete. All traces of the caterpillar are gone. And in its place is a butterfly with 4 delicate wings. But the newly developed monarch butterfly must wait a few hours for its wings to harden. And then, finally, it can fly. This particular generation of monarch butterflies is special. Every year, about 100 million of them begin an astonishing migration. Coming from southern Canada and the northeastern United States, each butterfly, starting on its own, flies about 2,000 miles, arriving 2 months later in Mexico. Their trip is part of a carefully timed cycle that began 3 generations back, when a group of monarchs left Mexico at the end of the winter. They flew as far north as the Gulf states, mated, and died. The second generation flew to the northern United States. There, they too mated and died, living only about a month. Their offspring, the third generation, completed the last leg of the journey to Canada, also surviving only about a month. But the fourth generation will live almost 9 months, and they'll fly all the way back to Mexico in one epic trip. It's an amazing natural cycle that so far eludes explanation. The mystery starts at the very beginning of the trip, because no one knows exactly what triggers the exodus from Canada.
Well, when the monarchs leave Canada, they have a 2,000-mile trek ahead of them, at least. They're freshly hatched butterflies. They've never taken a long flight in their lives, and they're on the way to an area that they've never seen before. Somehow they're recognizing landmarks or following streams or following the sun or following something. We just don't know exactly how they do it. It's really an incredible journey.
A monarch's wingspan is just under 4 inches, and they weigh less than 1/5 of an ounce. So how they survive their marathon migration is another mystery. They only fly when conditions are perfect. If it's too cold, they get sluggish and can't flap their wings. If it's too hot, they stop flying so they don't get overheated. They must also stop often for nectar and water. But every time they land, there can be enemies lurking. Bad weather is also the monarch's enemy. A rainstorm can be deadly. If it survives enemy attacks and bad weather, a monarch that started in Canada has to fly at least 50 miles a day to get to Mexico. The physical effort this requires is remarkable for a creature so small, with such fragile wings.
Butterflies are the worst possible body form for trying to make a long-distance migration. They're simply a bad design. Every time they flap their wings, they're using energy at least 20 times the rate than when they're not flapping it. So they're just burning their fuel up at a great rate, much like, say, a helicopter might. And so they have to compensate for their inadequacies by soaring. Soaring is gliding in rising air, much like I'm doing right now. The sun heats the ground heats the air above it. As the air heats, it expands and becomes lighter and begins to rise. And pretty soon you have a column of rising air. That's the thermal. Under good conditions, you can maintain the altitude you're at or even gain altitude. A more helpful maneuver is to circle in it. And you see hawks doing this and vultures doing this all the time. Circling in the thermal, staying within it, and this seems like a wonderful free ride, and it is. Soaring's the key to them getting to Mexico.
On the shores of the Great Lakes, just days into their journey, the monarchs face their first geographic hurdle. Miles of open water and constantly shifting winds.
As the monarchs are migrating out of Canada, they hit the Great Lakes, which are a barrier. They can't see across them.
With no land in sight, monarchs use their finely tuned sense of the direction of the wind to carry them across the water. If wind from the south, a headwind, threatens to blow them off course, they stop and wait. When they sense that the wind has shifted in their favor, they fly on. ultimate destination of their incredible journey is a tiny area about 60 square miles and 10,000 feet high in the mountains of Mexico. The local people, called the Mazahua, have lived here for hundreds of years. They believe monarchs represent the spirits of their ancestors, and the arrival of the butterflies each year begins a celebration called the Day of the Dead.
It's a very beautiful time when the butterflies arrive. The butterflies would come down, surround us, coming down to give the final touch to the tradition of the Day of the Dead. For those who live here, it's our belief from when I was a child. We would say they were the souls of our departed loved ones. Every year I make an altar. We put these things here because when our ancestors were alive, this is what they liked. That's why one waits for their arrival, to give them this offering.
The legends of the people that live near the ocean and the mountains are important to them. For us, there is a sense of space, the freedom to fly with imagination, to fly just like a butterfly.
Homero Arigas is one of Mexico's best-loved writers. He grew up in these hills and has fought to preserve them for monarchs. Every year, Lincoln Brower comes here to continue his study of the monarch migration.
When you were a young boy, Homero,
Yes.
did you used to go up to see the butterflies?
Yes, every year we came with the school children, and for us it was one of the most fantastic spectacles of the year to go to the Plain of the Mule to see the butterflies. But the butterflies also came to town. They were across the streets.
They flew through the town.
Exactly. They were looking for water. Sometimes there was in your house. But there were millions of butterflies. And for us, it was an spontaneous miracle to see butterflies here in the Cerro Altamirano. But we didn't know that they were coming from Canada, across the United States. And the Canadians and Americans didn't know that they were coming to these places.
It was not until 1975 that scientists discovered the full extent of the North American migration, when butterflies that had been tagged in Canada were found spending the winter here. These monarchs return each year to 12 specific sites in these mountains. This is their only destination in the world. It's a perfect environment for the butterflies because of the unique climate.
We're talking constantly about this microclimatic envelope, about 3,100 meters, usually on southwest-facing slopes. If you imagine the forest as a blanket that protects the butterflies by keeping the heat in, and also think of it as an umbrella that keeps the rain out. And the tree is like a hot water bottle. It's radiating heat out through the bodies of the butterflies. So when the temperature drops down really low, you'll see millions of monarchs just festooning these beautiful trunk clusters. If you think about it, the bigger the tree, the more heat it holds. So this is an argument for maintaining the forest in its native state, to let the trees get as big as they can, and the butterflies will be protected during those cold periods.
Monarchs live in other parts of the world in warm climates, but only Canadian and North American monarchs migrate such an incredible distance to avoid the certain death of a cold winter. And exactly how they navigate from Canada to Mexico is another unsolved mystery. Scientists only have a few clues. One theory is that the butterflies navigate by following a specific angle of the sun in relation to the Earth. Another theory proposes that the Earth's magnetic field may provide a subtle orientation guide. And recently, biologists discovered specific cells in the butterfly's brain that regulate their internal clock and help keep them on course. At the University of Kansas, Chip Taylor studies the forces at work in the monarch migration.
You've got a butterfly that's originating in Toronto, or it's originating in Point Pelee, or it's originating in Detroit, Michigan. It's coming down from St. Paul, it's maybe even Winnipeg, and it's moving south. And somehow it finds its way to Mexico. Could you do that?
And so now you need to tell whether or not it's a male or a female. And so this picture...
In 1992, Taylor started a project called Monarch Watch.
Are there any over here? Nope, so you know that one's a girl. So let's check out your butterfly.
School children and teachers tag butterflies from all over the northeastern United States. The tags don't hurt the butterflies and don't affect their ability to fly.
There he goes.
But when tagged butterflies are recovered at various stops along the way to Mexico, tracing back the information on the tags helps reveal their flight path and their traveling speed.
Let her go.
And one of Taylor's tagging experiments had a surprising outcome.
We ran some experiments a few years ago. So we took butterflies and we transferred them to Washington, D.C. And initially, when we released them in Washington, D.C., they behaved as if they were still in Kansas.
The butterflies who'd been moved to Washington started out flying in the same direction they would have taken to Mexico from their original home in Kansas, almost directly south. But starting from Washington, that flight path would never get them to Mexico. Amazingly, after a few days, the displaced monarchs somehow reoriented themselves and changed course to a strong southwest heading. That meant that even starting from an unfamiliar location, they still ended up in the right place in Mexico.
Now, this is really exciting stuff, because what this says is that somehow this butterfly is acquiring celestial information, perhaps magnetic information, and it's integrating those and remodeling the physiology of the system to have a different vector, to have a different direction from where it came from. Now, that's pretty cool.
By late September, about a month into the migration, the monarchs are gathering into huge flocks. By this time, they've traveled more than halfway across America. Over the industrial belt, through small Midwestern towns, across the Great Plains, and finally, approaching the Southwest. No one knows how many monarchs die along the way. But if they make it to Mexico, there's another threat. Their destination in the Mexican mountains, the forests that will keep them alive over the winter, is in danger.
It's like, you see all these trees, Lincoln? Yeah. Before there were hundreds and thousands, and now you can count them.
And they're all...
You see very tall and very wide.
In 1986, the Mexican government protected some sections of these mountains as official sanctuaries for the butterflies for the winter months. But that meant some parts of the forests local people had depended on for income through legal logging operations were suddenly off limits. The result was an unexpected new threat to the monarchs: illegal logging.
Están buscando medios, pero los que definitivamente ya no.
We all have needs,
A solventar ese tipo de problemas.
but those that cannot meet their needs, they are the ones doing the clandestine logging.
Trabajo de la tala clandestina.
Pues siempre suben a las 2, 3 de la mañana o algunos.
They come at 2 or 3 in the morning. They go down in the night to sell the wood.
Mexican police patrol the forest, but have not been able to stop illegal logging. The World Wildlife Fund pays villagers to try to stop the destruction, but they are no match for the dangerous forces at work.
Logging is clandestine and involves dangerous people. So you cannot go around telling the world about it. Sometimes you find yourself alone. And even with the police, you can be left alone. They will follow you to kill you. It's not that easy.
Who would allow their children to die of hunger? We know that it's important to preserve the forest for the butterflies, but because of our need, we have not been able to do it.
We're talking about hundreds of hectares of forest being leveled and then burned. I have been told that the reason they burn them after they log them is to destroy the evidence that they cut them, which sort of eludes my thinking completely. Even this small-scale logging operation is destroying the capacity of the monarchs to use those sites. There's so few trees left, and even if they did sit on the ones that were left, they'd freeze to death.
With the sanctuaries shrinking, an unusually cold winter in Mexico can be a disaster for the butterflies. During one storm, 80% of them died in a single sanctuary. If a harsh winter is followed by more bad weather in the spring, then no one knows how many butterflies will be able to breed new generations for future migrations.
If the numbers are reduced to the point where the migration starts to unravel, we don't know what the critical low number is, but I'm worried that we might just get close to it.
It's the middle of October. The butterflies are almost to the Mexican border. They started the migration scattered across thousands of miles of the northeastern U.S. and Canada. But at this point, they're flying together in a huge flock, only 50 miles wide for the final leg south.
I just saw the shadow of it.
For over 30 years, Texas zoologist Bill Calvert has conducted extensive field studies of the migration. But this year, he's worried. The butterflies are late.
Well, this is perfect. Except for one thing. No butterflies here. An endangered phenomena would not be the same as an endangered species. In the case of an endangered species, of course, we're worried about all the members disappearing. In the case of an endangered phenomena, we're worried that the migration would be reduced to such a state that it would be unnoticeable, or maybe even the migration itself would disappear. I mean, the predictions are that this is going to be the lowest population ever.
So far, he's only seen a single monarch.
Well, it's in pretty good shape. It's got a couple of pieces missing out of a wing over here, but otherwise it's in pretty good shape. There he goes, off to Mexico.
At the end of the day, Calvert decides to take one more look in a secluded corner of the woods.
Let's see what we got in there. Oh, wow. Look at him up there. My God. It's just fantastic. Well, there are hundreds of thousands passing us right now. Butterflies have dazzled humans for millennia. It's a beautiful little creature, and on top of that, it migrates 2,000 miles. And this just staggers the mind.
The butterflies have been traveling for 6 weeks from Canada. But they still face the most treacherous part of the journey. They must fly over hundreds of miles of scorching desert and navigate the towering Sierra Madre Mountains.
Something has to focus on. I think the Sierra Madre Mountains serve that purpose. The mountains stick up pretty high, the butterflies encounter them, and they turn and they follow the mountains, and they can follow the mountains for 900 miles.
Late October in Mexico. The butterflies are expected soon. And the Mazahua people prepare to welcome them.
It's a privilege that God has sent us this insect. We take advantage of the months that the butterflies are here to earn our living. Because the truth is that we have a community that is quite poor. In this season, we earn enough to make a living. It's not a lot of money, but you can rely on it.
As they wait for the butterflies, the Mazahua pray for their safe arrival, along with the spirits of their loved ones. It's now the first week in November.
Hasta mariposas irá. ¿Hasta qué irá? Sí, hay 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. No puedes contar.
After 2 months and thousands of miles of flight, the butterflies have finally reached safety. Millions of them arrive over the next few days, and the people rejoice. Now, with their long journey finally behind them, the monarchs rest. They huddle together in huge clusters and cling to the trees for warmth. They'll leave the trees occasionally to feed on nectar and water. But they return to these clusters and stay here for almost 5 months. When spring arrives, the butterflies bloom again. They open their wings to the sun, warming up for flight. Most of these monarchs will travel back to Texas. There they will stop to mate. Each female will lay 300 to 400 fertilized eggs.
As possible, only 74% of the total volume is taken up by the product. The other 26% is void space, which goes unused when transporting the cans or in a store display. An engineer could solve this problem by making a cuboid-shaped can. It sits on a table, but it's uncomfortable to hold and awkward to drink from, and while easier to manufacture than a sphere, these edges are weak points and require very thick walls. But the cuboid surpasses the sphere in packing efficiency. It has almost no wasted space, although at the sacrifice of using more surface area to contain the same volume as the sphere. So, to create a can, engineers use a cylinder, which has elements of both shapes. From the top, it's like a sphere, and from the side, it's like a cuboid. A cylinder has a maximum packing factor of about 91%, not as good as the cuboid, but better than the sphere. Most important of all, the cylinder can be rapidly manufactured. The can begins as this disc called a blank, punched from an aluminum sheet about 3/10 of a millimeter thick. The first step starts with a drawing die, on which sits the blank and then a blank holder that rests on top. We'll look at a slice of the die so we can see what's happening. A cylindrical punch presses down on the die, forming the blank into a cup. This process is called drawing. This cup is about 88 millimeters in diameter, larger than the final can, so it's redrawn. That process starts with this wide cup and uses another cylindrical punch and a redrawing die. The punch presses the cup through the redrawing die and transforms it into a cup with a narrower diameter, which is a bit taller. This redrawn cup is now the final diameter of the can 65 millimeters, but it's not yet tall enough. A punch pushes this redrawn cup through an ironing ring. The cup stays the same diameter as it becomes taller and the walls thinner. If we watch this process again up close, you see the initial thick wall and then the thinner wall after it's ironed. Ironing occurs in 3 stages, each progressively making the walls thinner and the can taller. After the cup is ironed, the dome on the bottom is formed. This requires a convex doming tool and a punch with a matching concave indentation. As the punch presses the cup downward into the doming tool, the cup bottom then deforms into a dome. That dome reduces the amount of metal needed to manufacture the can. The dome bottom uses less material than if the bottom were flat. A dome is an arch revolved around its center. The curvature of the arch distributes some of the vertical load into horizontal forces, allowing a dome to withstand greater pressure than a flat beam. On the dome, you might notice 2 large numbers. These debossed numbers are engraved on the doming tool. The first number signifies the production line in the factory, and the second number signifies the body maker number. The body maker is the machine that performs the redrawing, ironing, and doming processes. These numbers help troubleshoot production problems in the factory. In that factory, the manufacturing of a can takes place at a tremendous rate. These last 3 steps, redrawing, ironing, and doming, all happen in one continuous stroke and in only 1/7 of a second. The punch moves at a maximum velocity of 11 meters per second and experiences a maximum acceleration of 45 Gs. This process runs continuously for 6 months, or around 100 million cycles before the machine needs servicing. Now, if you look closely at the top of the can body, you see that the edges are wavy and uneven. These irregularities occur during the forming. To get a nice, even edge, about 6 millimeters is trimmed off of the top. With an even top, the can can now be sealed. But before that sealing occurs, a colorful design is printed on the outside. The term of art in the industry is decoration. The inside also gets a treatment. A spray-coated epoxy lacquer separates the can's contents from its aluminum walls. This prevents the drink from acquiring a metallic taste and also keeps acids in the beverage from dissolving the aluminum. The next step forms the can's neck, the part of the can body that tapers inward. This necking requires 11 stages. The forming starts with a straight-walled can. The top is brought slightly inward, and then this is repeated further up the can wall until the final diameter is reached. The change in neck size at each stage is so subtle that you can barely tell a difference between one stage and the next. Each one of these stages works by inserting an inner die into the can body, then pushing an outer die, called the necking sleeve, around the outside. The necking sleeve retracts, the inner die retracts, and the can moves to the next stage. The necking is drawn out over many different stages to prevent wrinkling or pleating of the thin aluminum. Since the 1960s, the diameter of the can end has become smaller by 6 millimeters, from 60 millimeters to 54 millimeters today. This seems a tiny amount, but the aluminum can industry produces over 100 billion cans a year, so that 6 millimeter reduction saves at least 90 million kilograms of aluminum annually. That amount would form a solid cube of aluminum 32 meters on a side. Compare that to a 787 Dreamliner with a 60-meter wingspan. Now, after the neck has been formed, the top is flanged. That is, it flares out slightly and allows the end to be secured to the body, which brings us to the next brilliant design feature, the double seam. On older steel cans, manufacturers welded or soldered on the ends. This often contaminated the can's contents. In contrast, today's cans use a hygienic double seam, which can also be made faster. This can is cut in half so you can see the cross-section of the double seam. To create this seam, a machine uses 2 basic operations. The first curls the end of the can cover around the flange of the can body. The second operation presses the folds of the metal together to form an airtight seal. While the operations themselves are simple, they require high precision. Parts misaligned by a small fraction of a millimeter cause the seam to fail. In addition to the clamping of the end and can body, a sealing compound ensures that no gas escapes through the double seam. The compound is applied as a liquid, then hardens to form a gasket. The end, attached immediately after the can is filled, traps gases inside the can to create pressures of about 30 psi, or 2 times atmospheric pressure. In soda, carbon dioxide produces the pressure. In non-carbonated drinks like juices, nitrogen is added. So why is a beverage can pressurized? Because the internal pressure creates a strong can despite its thin walls. Squeeze a closed, pressurized can, it barely gives. Then, squeeze an empty can. It flexes easily, the can walls are thin, only 75 microns thick, and they're flimsy. But the internal pressure of a sealed can pushes outwards equally and so keeps the wall in tension. This tension is key. The thin wall acts like a chain. In compression, it has no strength, but in tension, it's very strong. The internal pressure strengthens the cans so that they can be safely stacked. A pressurized can easily supports the weight of an average human adult. It also adds enough strength so that the can doesn't need the corrugations like in this unpressurized steel food can. While initially pressurized to about 2 atmospheres, a can may experience up to 4 atmospheres of internal pressure in its lifetime due to elevated temperatures, and so the can is designed to withstand up to 6 atmospheres or 90 psi before the dome or the end will buckle. Why is there a tab on the end of the can? It seems a silly question. How else would you open it? But originally, cans didn't have tabs. Very early steel cans were called flat tops for pretty obvious reasons. You use a special opener to puncture a hole to drink from and a hole to vent. In the 1960s, the pull tab was invented so that no opener was needed. The tab worked like this. You lift up this ring to vent the can and pull the tab to create the opening. Easy enough, but now you've got this loose tab. The cans ask you to please don't litter, but sadly these pull tabs got tossed on the ground where the sharp edges of the tabs cut the bare feet of beachgoers or they harmed wildlife. So the beverage can industry responded by inventing the modern stay-on tab. This little tab involved clever engineering. The tab starts as a second-class lever. This is like a wheelbarrow because the tip of the tab is the fulcrum and the rivet the load. The effort is being applied on the end. But here's the genius part. The moment the can vents, the tab switches to a first-class lever, which is like a seesaw, where the load is now at the tip and the fulcrum is the rivet. You can see clearly how the tab, when working as a wheelbarrow, lifts the rivet. In fact, part of the reason this clever design works is because the pressure inside the can helps to force the rivet up, which in turn depresses the outer edge of the top until it vents the can, and then the tab changes to a seesaw lever. Looking from the inside of the can, you can see how the tab first opens near the rivet. If you try to simply force the scored metal section into the can using the tab as a first-class lever with the rivet as the fulcrum throughout, you'd be fighting the pressure inside the can. The tab would be enormous and expensive. If you'd like to learn more about the entire life cycle of the aluminum can, watch this animated video by Rexam that describes can manufacturing and recycling. A typical aluminum can today contains about 70% recycled material. Also, Discovery's How It's Made has some great footage of the manufacturing machinery. Here are 2 different stepwise animations of the entire can forming process. And lastly, these are 2 detailed animations of the cup drawing and redrawing processes. The aluminum beverage can is so ubiquitous that it's easy to take